G'day Legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far that you are having a brilliant week. Now Legends, as always, of course, we have a lot to go over and I'll give you a quick health update as well. But today in the video, of course, we're going to look at the maps. I'll look at geolocations, we'll compare maps as well and where things are moving around and what that tells us. We need to do a breakdown, a complete breakdown of this resource deal between the US and Ukraine. And if you're trying to piece this together and you're thinking, this doesn't make sense, I don't know what it means, don't worry, you're not alone. This currently is only the framework of a deal. Even the US and Ukraine don't particularly know how this will look. We know Zelensky and Trump are meeting on the 28th, so the day after tomorrow for all the people in normal time zones, and Trump says it's a very big agreement. We need to look at military spending. We'll talk a little bit about Trump, China, and Russia, and where we've spoken about some leverage in there as well, and changes in global economies. And I want to have a look at what has occurred in Romania, following on from, of course, the election that was canned because Calin Georgescu was about to win. And I want to talk about that, European democracy, total democracy, and how this is moving across the Western world and the impacts that fighting authoritarianism with authoritarianism may well have, or at least how it looks, and of course the relationship with the US. So of course we have a lot to go over. But of course we also have news on my health. Now, it's not great, it's not terrible. Insert the quote somewhere about Chernobyl. I'd say it's good news. Now, as you are aware, well, I hope you're aware, I've been undergoing chemotherapy for the past 3 months. Now, what we are hoping for is we are hoping for the tumour to reduce in size somewhat away from where my motor strip is in my brain, of course, controlling things like my arm and leg, whatever else, so we may be able to have a higher chance at some sort of surgery. Now, it hasn't reduced in size at all, but nor has it increased. Now, it's looking like maybe the chemo is holding it at bay. Maybe the kill rate of the chemo is meeting then the growth rate of the tumour. Now, obviously, I don't have any neurological deficits. I don't think that Velyka Novosilka still holds, or that Kursk was a fantastic strategic operational game changer. So I guess we will walk into the future together and see what happens in the brain in another 3 months. Maybe I'll do another video on that. But where should we start? Of course, we always have a lot to go. So let's start at the maps, and then I want to talk about Romania, as I think this just shows where things are moving, and where things are moving, I think, in a very dangerous direction under the guise of democracy. Okay, so of course in the center of your screen you have Ukraine and the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014, and the red check that you're going to see on this is ground that Russia has made over the past 24 hours. The blue check is, of course, Ukraine. Now, yesterday afternoon we got another update, so I'll show you that first. So what we see is around Kotliny, just to the west of Pokrovsk. We see from yesterday, this is the first update yesterday, to the 26th, we see Ukraine had an advancement taking back the majority of Kotliny, and then up to today that has then stabilized at that point. So we'll keep an eye on what is shifting and changing around there. But what we know is at least America and Russia are serious, at least in public statements, about then negotiations and then ceasefires, the war ending. Europe, on the other hand, well, we'll talk about them a little bit later. But of course, what was put forward on the eve of the Swiss Peace Summit, again, no neurological deficits there, what was put forward by Russia was that they will then stop the war if they take then the 4 oblasts of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk. And in that, we would assume a withdrawal then out of Kharkiv. Now, Kharkiv at the moment is more than double what is occupied back into Kursk. Of course, that was rejected and basically laughed out of the room. And what a lot of people have been assuming is, well, at this point in time, the war would freeze along this border. Of course, the border moving in the direction of Russia's favour. But what we do have today is that Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, has really pushed back on this in some questions in Qatar. So let's look down at this paragraph just here, and then we'll go over the remainder of this, talking about the end of the conflict and is Russia not considering a scenario of NATO troops? How would this be? Is Russia ready to consider this? But this is the part I'm interested in. He says, some suggest an idea of preserving the line of contact. So where that front line is, where that red zone is, that is the line. He says, first, this will not happen. Russia has a constitution based on the will of the people. Secondly, whatever is left of Ukraine should also be cleared of racist laws. Some of the people living there are more comfortable speaking Russian, and they want to preserve their traditions and ancestors. But what I'm interested in is, what I've underlined here, this will not happen on the line of contact. So, as Sergei Lavrov says, and what I'm reading into this, is that no, they're not happy with this. That their discussions are starting at where the border of those 4 oblasts is, as was presented last year at the Swiss Peace Summit. Well, on the eve of it, Russia wasn't invited to it, but what was then put out into the open about where Russia would end. And at this point in time, this is the problem, is there's going to have to be a stick not working, and the West is not prepared to give Ukraine a big enough stick. So therefore, it's going to have to be the carrot. And with the advances, a couple of 100 square kilometres every month, someone in my chat describes it as how many Maltas has moved per month, then where is then going to be the carrot of where the front line will end? And maybe they have ambitions for those oblasts. Maybe there is ambitions all the way to the Dnieper River. Of course, when I had my interview with Mr. History Legends, that is one thing he has said, is that it may be a continuation all the way to the physical border of the Dnieper River. So I guess we will see. But all of those who are going to counter this with saying, well, it's going to take 85 years, ISW, what I'll say is, if you believe attritional warfare is linear, and if you're listening to someone who believes it is linear, then maybe stop watching them. I could use the viewers. Anyway, let's talk about a few things on the maps and where things are moving. So firstly, I actually want to step up into Kursk. Of course, we have Ukraine, Sumy, Russia, Kursk, and where things have been moving across here very recently. No changes shown on this map today, but there is some very interesting developments that we are seeing in here, and it's really worth speaking because this will have an impact on the maps or the attritional ratio as well. So recently, there has been a significantly uptick, already from high. It was already high, but significant uptick of footage showing destroyed Ukrainian equipment, primarily in the Ukrainian side of Sumy, but also around Sudzha in the occupied area of Kursk, with Iskanders, Lancets, and fibre optics being the main culprits of this. And there has been a huge uptick in this. And today I just want to show you 2 pieces of footage. So just underneath the U on Guevo here, we see at least a claimed Fab 3000. Now, I believe it's not. I think it's probably a 1500 at best, but Russian pages like CNN reporting on an AR-15, at the moment, it's just everything is a Fab 5 fucking 3000, that it could just be an AK firing at a grenade and it's a fucking Fab 3000. We do know, though, initially, and from one of my contacts, that Russia did not want to use FABs due to the damage on infrastructure, but now we are seeing all different types used, and the footage here is this, just to show the increase in the use case of these, as well as the geolocation of it, and the, of course, increase in the targeting. And we see then this today of then in Sumy that a Ukrainian S-300 has been struck with an airburst Iskander. Now, we do know those Iskanders, their kill chain and also their efficiency of use has increased dramatically. We can see, of course, snow on the ground indicating it, at least from recent. Everything is saying that it was from yesterday. We can see that airburst and then subsequently the fireworks display of an air defense missile system then exploding. So one thing I'll say is to keep an eye up on here, because what we did speak about was that Ukraine's one territory card on the table is this. Russia know this, and if they're looking seriously at going to negotiations with the US as a mediator, Russia may look to move assets into here to actually be able to then collapse this at the moment. So I guess we will see. But that uptick in equipment, of course, that equipment has come online for that area. It does tell us a lot. Now, let's move our way down into then Bilahorivka. Now, what we see is this map still hasn't moved. We know then 3 or 4 days ago, we've had geolocations out to here. Some say it was close enough to here from this point, maybe 2 kilometers back. Now, AMK mapping, he says this. Of course, this is the chalk, then a quarry in here. Ukrainian forces are surrounded in a couple of positions on the edge of the White Mountain, hiding under concrete slabs and in pipes, dugouts and rifle positions. Of course, this is very important high ground. He says that there are Ukrainian units surrounded in here. I can't confirm or deny this. According to reports, 2 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed after Russian forces assaulted these positions, likely unsuccessfully assault, and 6 to 7 are still holding out, but are cut off from supplies. So, again, we see that claim, but it does tend to back up with what we saw of the geolocations that we looked at back on Sunday. So these were the 3 geolocations of Russian flags going up. So at the different times in here. So it could, of course, show that there maybe is some level of encirclement around this high point in here. So again, before we confirm anything, we will wait and see. So let's move our way down into Toretsk. Now, of course, what we showed yesterday was there was a Ukrainian geolocation right in the center. Well, not right in the center, right about here down this main road here. Now, Suryak Maps, he has updated his map to show this. In the last hours, Ukrainian army managed to infiltrate again in the city of Toretsk and entrenched in the high buildings adjacent to the stadium. So wait out on further confirmation of what has happened there. Of course, what the footage was it showed Ukrainian forces under Russian artillery. So we definitely know that it is contested ground in here, maybe even blue. Now, let's continue our way down the maps. Now, no changes today on this front, but what we do see is, of course, the Constantinople pocket and Rivka, that this is showing that this is closing up. Now, I believe that most likely this is actually being read for some time now, but according to the deep state map, it is showing that this pocket is closing. And could there be an element of forces that remain within that? I guess we will see. And the Russian forces have continued their expansion to the north and northwest of Velyka Novosilka, as we spoke about yesterday, the further expansion in the direction of Komar. So we see out to Belatsky, there was this red check indicating the Russian advancement there. Now we need to come further west, and of course this is the Dnieper River, and we're looking for Lobkove, this Piatkatki, which I cannot pronounce, but I hope you get a giggle in something as shocking as this war. I hope that maybe just me being an idiot will bring some happiness. But what we see is Lobkove in here, that at least by Suryak map, that he claims that Russian forces have had an advancement in here and have captured this locality. So what we're looking to do is line up the roads in here. We can see where this road is and this intersection, that this area in here has come under control. But again, we will wait and see. Now, back to what Lavrov has said in this press conference. Of course, President of France, Emmanuel Macron, said following talks with Donald Trump that parties agreed the need to deploy European peacekeepers in Ukraine after the end of the conflict. The Kremlin has repeatedly stated that Russia is not considering such a scenario provided it is not NATO troops. If European countries force, would Russia be ready to consider? Again, what we have heard about too is maybe there could be a European force deployed, but is not under NATO or not under Article 5. Similar to when Turkey goes into Syria to conduct operations, they're not under Article 5. Sergei Lavrov says, "We cannot consider any such options. I do not know what Macron was talking about. He did not play his role convincingly in Washington." He talks about only this could be made with consent on both sides, and no one has asked us, being Russia, about it, that Europeans are fanning the conflict and suppressing any attempts to calm it down. He speaks about Macron stated the need for ceasefires, but there wasn't discussion about territories, people, lives, or parameters, as that would come after the ceasefire. And he says, "This is cunning. We cannot possibly agree to an arrangement that is aimed at achieving one single goal, to pump Ukraine full of weapons again." On February 24th, a large group of European officials visited Ukraine and again announced multi-billion-dollar arms deliveries. The funny thing is, both Russia and Ukraine are pointing at each other for wanting this, saying, well, if there's a ceasefire, you are just going to pump weapons for the front line, get rest, and go on. Again, so it's the Spider-Man meme of both pointing at each other. He says, when the United States introduces a resolution on the urgent need to move towards peace, Europe votes against. Until recently, it was that Europe wanted strategic defeat to be inflicted on Russia, something that the European Union and NATO chanted every day like a spell. Macron said in Washington that it's now necessary to achieve a settlement that would not look like capitulation. We have seen this. We have seen the goal of this, or the goalposts shift to what is maybe realistic, to not look like a capitulation, a defeat, away from then a full strategic defeat and collapse of Russia. He also states that the root causes have to do with Ukraine being dragged into NATO, with an eye using its territory to create a military infrastructure targeted at Russia. So he speaks again and again on this root cause. We need to look at what the root cause is, that Russia doesn't want Ukraine joining NATO. Chewing on mere technicalities, as such as the deployment of troops, will not bring us closer to an agreement. The discussion on the root causes cannot be avoided forever. And we know that Trump has at least hinted at, of course, the entry into NATO being one of the root causes too. So we will see what happens in the future. So let's quickly look at military spending. We heard Lavrov talk about the strategic defeat, the collapse of Russia, and where many spoke of that for years and years, and where this shift then took place very slowly, very gradually, so no one really noticed it, but it definitely took place. And there's always this talk about that military spending in Russia is so high that it will collapse. Now, my podcast with an economist, which is the top link below, he pushed back on that. But this came from Reuters, just the world's top military spenders. And I think this tells us a lot. So what we can see is the expenditure and the share of GDP. Now, this expenditure doesn't take into account purchasing power parity, okay? China, to get a tank, is going to be significantly cheaper than the US. So when we put in the PPP, this evens out a fair bit more and changes things around. But what I really want to look at is the share of GDP. Okay, so America is at 3.5%. Russia is just below 6%. Saudis, they're higher. They're at 7.1%. Israel is at 5.3%. So Israel's more closely aligned where Russia is on the percentage of GDP. And I think this goes against the narrative that the economy is imminently going to collapse at any point, and to watch out for it, which we've been hearing for years. Okay, so I think that just pushes back on that every time people see a dip in the ruble, then this is the time that it is all happening. The GDP military spending is a lot, but it isn't as high as when we have seen that really influencing before, even recently, to, of course, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And what Dr. Connolly said in that link below is he said it is high, it's having impact, but potentially it may actually be able to go even higher if needed. But war, of course, is where a lot of money is to be made, both in the stock market, as a CEO, or on OnlyFans. But we also, of course, don't see any of that shared with the guys actually wearing the cost of the war on the front line. That YouTubers just take it all for themselves. But what we see is Rheinmetall, of course, Germany's largest armoured vehicle maker, of course, a producer. They make a hell of a lot of military equipment. Although they're competing with South Korea at the moment, South Korea is coming with a better item at a lower price, but I think they need to watch out. But what we see here is we, of course, see from the beginning of the war, so the 25th of Feb, up until then today, that their stock price has had an increase of 806%. And if we went back a little bit further to the weeks prior, it would be even higher. Some suggest it's about 1,000% overall if you then include dividends, all of that. So you've 10x your money in 3 years. If only we could turn back the clock. But we will see more and more of this. And of course, this recent uptick has been that the US moving away support, that Europe needs to be more sovereign in their military, or where they're going to be buying it from, Rheinmetall, if they can keep up. So let's talk about Romania. And this is something I think is relevant because it shows us a lot of the future, the potential future of Europe. Now, the news today is Romanian prosecutors have charged Călin Georgescu on 6 counts in criminal case rocking the country. Now, of course, Georgescu, he came out on top of the first round of Romania's presidential elections in December. He was just about to win. It was basically in the 11th minute. The country's constitutional court then annulled the following declassification of intelligence reports showing Russian involvement in influencing voters, and then basically scrapping the election, and potentially in the future that he can't actually run again. Now, the claim is that there was 950 to 1,000 euros paid to creators by a, quote, foreign entity to post pro-Georgescu TikToks. Many also claimed that there was no concrete evidence to suggest who this was or if Georgescu even knew about it. And of course, this is one of the big things we saw JD Vance, Vice President, we've even seen Elon Musk talk about, but especially JD at his now infamous speech to Europe, that he basically said if a few $100,000 can undermine your democracy, then it wasn't that strong to begin with. And this is a very, very tricky case. But let's look at this article first. A Romanian ultra-nationalist politician was picked up by police for questioning earlier on Wednesday regarding false funding sources and false information in his last campaign. The charges revolve around his support for sympathisers of Iron Guard pre-World War II fascist anti-Semitic movement and political party, which is illegal under Romanian law. He's known as the TikTok Messiah, has also been barred from leaving the country and is not allowed to create any new social media accounts on top of the ones he already has. Freedom of speech going well here. Georgescu has said, "We are the people, we are the power, we will not kneel before anyone." This was expected. The whole world knows what is happening in Romania now. It's the despair here combined with that of Brussels. So this is a very, very big thing because a guy about to win, they're saying that there was, and it's really turned back on that democratic process. And with what JD Vance is saying, well, if there was a few $100,000, people saying 360,000 euros, if that can undermine the whole thing, well, one, it allows it to be undermined. So now if whatever foreign entity doesn't want then a player to be in power, we could just boost some TikTok ads and they'll just be taken out automatically. But also, he was looking to overwhelmingly have victory. So, of course, many, many people voted that way. And propaganda can influence things, but it doesn't completely swing. Remember what we've said is good propaganda, and if this is the case, then it has, of course, been effective propaganda, then it has to have some truth in it, or else it will just fall flat. So obviously, even if it is propagandized, many Romanians have actually agreed with, or it has resonated with a large amount of them. But how democratic for freedom of press, speech, and freedom of expression? And I think Europe is sinking, and I think quickly, into total democracy. And I believe that Australia, we're right up there as well. The only thing with Australia is we're not as independent as Europe as a whole, that if America coughs, we catch a cold. But in this book, I think this outlines as well, and it was talking about the Soviet Union at the time, and of course the endless applause of 1937, where they say it was an extreme point of total democracy, where everyone has a say, but everyone agrees. And the only reason to disagree is because you are the enemy of everyone else. Total democracy. So that it is democratic, but deviation from the accepted liberal democratic norms, therefore you're seen as an enemy of the state. And I'll give some examples that maybe we see in everyday life. That everyone can have an opinion on what constitutes gender. Everyone has a say, but everyone agrees. And the only reason to disagree is that you are an enemy of the state or an enemy of the people. We see this in this war with any alternative opinions or even legitimate analysis. So if you suggest in this war anything but the norm, the accepted liberal democratic norm, that narrative, then you are put as a state enemy, a propagandist, a shill, or an agent. And I think that this total democracy that we see, that it is, you have the freedom to think whatever, but if it goes away from that, if it deviates from the accepted of it, then you're an enemy. And in this case, we see the media, and the media's new favourite thing, and it has been for a couple of years, the ultra-nationalist, extreme right-wing labelling. And these terms, they are used on purpose. They are used to discredit any of their views then by labelling as that. So everything will be associated. For an example, if you're in a discussion or a heated argument with a black person, and then they or someone else just calls you a racist, even if it's just about what is the best type of Toyota, that label there forward will discredit everything you say. And don't think the media is not doing this on purpose. So again, I think we need to be very, very careful about that. If we are choosing to fight authoritarianism with authoritarianism, what that looks like is total democracy. We're democratic, you can think what you want, but if you are outside of the accepted, you're an enemy. And the university system has just completely fallen into this as a whole. Look at it in a country like Australia. I have a lot of Scottish heritage. And people say white heritage, whatever you want to call it. I don't really give a shit. Now, if someone on the other side of the aisle was because I'm happy with this and I'm proud of my heritage and blah, 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 fine, great, whatever. If I were to say, look, I'm proud of this and, horrible things have occurred, but everyone at some point was really bloody under the thumb and everyone has been the victim of oppression and regimes, just how far back do you want to go? I would be seen as a extremist, I guess, or one of these terms they want to put. Again, you can think what you want, but if it's outside of the accepted narrative, you can be seen as an enemy. Now, you may think they are strong words, but I believe this is a very, very slippery slope, and I believe that slope is pretty fucking steep. And I don't know where we are. I don't know if we're halfway down it, we're coming out of it, or we're just on then the bloody curve at the top, ready to put our hands up as the roller coaster goes. And this, I just put into ChatGPT to see what it said. All I put in was authoritarianism, fighting authoritarianism with authoritarianism. And it says that this is a paradox where those opposing oppressive rule end up using similar methods of control, censorship, or suppression to combat it. This often leads to a cycle where the justification for restricting freedoms is framed as necessary to prevent greater oppression. Examples include governments restricting free speech to protect democracy, banning opposition parties in the name of fighting extremism, imposing strict measures that limit rights under the guise of maintaining order. It raises the question, can true freedom be defended by limiting it? And this war, I think, takes in all those examples that we are seeing put across many different areas. So keep an eye out. Now, what I said is we are going to do a full breakdown of this resource deal, what has been said, and put it into a bit of a TLDR because we are 28 minutes in. Okay, so what we talked about was, one of my theories was that the US, Trump's calculus is we need to somehow put the brakes on China, and that Russia, it's like a NOS boost to where then, of course, China has some limitations. And one of my contacts behind the scenes, very knowledgeable, has said this. Trump isn't looking at Europe. Trump is looking at China. China is making bigger waves. China is consistently drilling its navy off the coast of Taiwan and Australia. China is consistently microaggressing anyone within what it deems its space, dangerously flying too close to other aircraft, ramming or water cannons against other naval vessels, using sonar against divers. This week, it was live firing between New Zealand and Australia as a clear signal to both, but especially to New Zealand, who they have deeply infiltrated the government and economic structures of, and who has only a few war canoes and a Cessna. Might be overstating their capabilities, despite a quite capable land defence force. Doesn't help that one of those ships ran aground. Bringing Russia in from the cold will disrupt BRICS. Russia is the expeditionary military component of BRICS. China isn't the one sending PMCs to train other military forces and conduct operations. Brazil and India have deployed a force in Africa under a UN banner and frankly aren't being requested to come back as PMCs and are trying to maintain neutrality. So Russia is how BRICS can project force, and BRICS is frankly an economic arm of China, as the EU is to Germany. If the US can take Russia away from BRICS, it loses the ability to back up its rights and claims, and this puts BRICS in a difficult place. For example, France held a financial monopoly over its former African colonies post-independence. France controlled the banking system and their central banks. If anyone attempted to mess with French control, the Foreign Legion was always nearby to help restore order until a more amicable government could be placed in power. And I think this tells us a lot about how Trump is seeing this and the calculus of maybe some betrayal, maybe ceasefire, however you want to talk about it, even if you then put it as saviour, but to try and bring Russia into somewhat, maybe not bring into America's orbit, but take away from China's orbit. Now, of course, we know that a resource deal is going ahead. So let's have a quick look over this. Now, Zelensky has said at a press conference that Ukraine will not repay money given to it by the US as part of the natural resources deal. I will not accept even 10 cents of debt repayment in this deal. Otherwise, it will be a precedent. Trump has said that he's trying to get the money back. And in this CNN article, they say Trump falsely claimed the US has given $350 billion to Ukraine, but the actual figure is around $120 billion. Now, accounting, and I'm a shit accountant, but I could make both figures very easily. How you make the $120 billion is, well, you're the Biden administration and you sign off every vehicle as being worth $10. How you make $350 billion, well, what you do is you put down the price as the replacement for all of those vehicles. So you're not replacing Humvees with Humvees. You're sending Humvees, but you're replacing with AMRAPs or Oshkosh, which are far more expensive. So you're replacing a $200,000 vehicle with a $3 million vehicle, and you will meet that target. Now, I could account, and I'm a shit accountant, I could easily find both of those, and there's probably a lot of money somewhere that wasn't on the official cards either around ISR. So I guess we will see. They also say Trump falsely claimed that Europe's support was in the form of a loan. We saw, of course, where Macron had pulled up Trump on this, saying we paid 60% of the total effort if it was like US loans, guarantees and grants. Now, this is not as simple as CNN states. Shock, horror, I know, pick your jaw up off the fucking floor. Now, Europe is sending a lot of funds that are profits off the $300 billion worth of Russian frozen assets. So if that makes 10% a year, $30 billion, they are sending that. That, if and when Europe then takes that money, that is Europe getting paid back. That we've given, $10 billion, even if it's just, we've given a grant of $10 billion, that's not even the profit, we've just given a grant, but when that $300 billion comes into Europe, that we will get paid back in that. Where this doesn't state it though, is if that $300 billion under negotiations ends up going back under Russian control, well, Europe will be left, to use a Reddit term, holding the bag. So we will see. It's not as simple though as it is said here. Europe has those frozen assets. The US doesn't. The US has been giving money in grants. The US only has, I believe, $10 to $15 billion worth of frozen assets. So they don't have that lump sum. And let's look at what Lavrov has said about this and how this all links in. That Reuters reported that Moscow is considering a scenario in which frozen assets would be allocated for Ukraine's reconstruction and may be designated to what Russia claims its new regions in, of course, these oblasts. Is Russia genuinely exploring this possibility? He continues to ask, Washington and Kyiv are planning on to sign an agreement on rare earths. Of course, a significant amount of these remain in occupied territories. Have you discussed the extraction of these with the US? Now, Lavrov answers, when the president or any representative of the Russian leadership invites foreign investors to participate on projects on Russian territory, they naturally refer to the entire territory of the Russian Federation in accordance with its constitution. So what he's meaning by this is, well, no, what you and I may call occupied or part of the war, whatever you want to call it, that due to how they have then ran questionable votes in those areas, but it's seen under the Constitution that when those investors come, they're speaking about all of it, including Crimea or Donetsk or Luhansk or Kherson. The issue was not raised or discussed during the meeting in Saudi Arabia. Regarding our assets stolen by Europeans, no concrete discussions have taken place on this matter. But there is no doubt that as part of any settlement, this issue will naturally remain relevant. The Americans understand this well. So saying that they are stolen, and in any settlement, this will be relevant, of course, wanting that money back. Secretary of State Marco Rubio recently stated that the issue of frozen Russian assets must be considered in conjunction with the retaliatory measures adopted by the Russian Federation. Lavrov continues to talk about then French President Emmanuel Macron, saying he declared that Russian assets seized in Europe must not be touched, as this would violate international law. However, the profits generated from these assets could well be used to support Ukraine. We would like to request from our French colleagues clarify which international legal instrument permits the use of profits derived from stolen property. Okay, so if you go to jail and your bank account gets frozen and then interest on that, can that interest then be used and taken in other areas, just on a massive scale of that? But what we know is the big hitters, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and Ursula von der Leyen, they don't at the moment want to touch that 300 billion. They are worried about then the dominance of the euro following this. So Zelensky on, of course, the minerals deal, and he's meeting with Trump in a couple of days, has said, if we don't have this, nothing will work. Of course, meetings and deals with America. I need to understand what will happen to us, to our families tomorrow, and where the US stand. We don't just need agreements on money, we're trying to survive. My first question is, will America stop military aid? So will that aid continue? And again, this deal has no mention of security guarantees or further military equipment also. And this is what Trump has said recently as well.
We're going to be getting all of that money back plus a lot more. And we provided a great thing. I mean, we provided something very important. And we'll be working with Ukraine, and because we'll be taking that, we're going to be taking what we're entitled to take. Now, they spent $350 billion.
So we're going to take what we're entitled to take, and also claiming that they're going to take more. So what is the resource deal? Now, this is the draft text at least obtained by CNN, talking about reinvesting revenues into funds at 50% and then can be used in Ukraine. And contributions made to the fund will be reinvested at least annually in Ukraine to promote the safety, security and prosperity of Ukraine and rebuild. So how does this get the money then to the US, you ask? Well, I wrote up this, and I thought this may simplify things a little bit, and it touches on what we spoke about. Well, then how is the US getting its money back? Well, essentially, the US isn't necessarily expecting a direct repayment of military aid in cash, but is securing a long-term economic and strategic advantage through resource control and investment opportunity. The House never loses. America, the US being the powerful nation here, making these, the House never loses. The US is still set to benefit financially from this new minerals deal. Under the agreement, 50% of future revenues from Ukraine's mineral and metal extraction will be directed into a jointly managed investment fund. While this fund is intended for Ukraine's reconstruction, the US will likely have a significant say in how the money is allocated, potentially steering it towards US companies involved in rebuilding efforts or resource extraction. For example, contractors. There's hundreds of billions of dollars needed in demining, new roads, removing asbestos or cleanup of asbestos, building schools, building hospitals, building bridges, whatever it is. There's hundreds of billions of dollars, if not into the trillions of dollars of reconstruction needed here. And the US, of course, is going to steer towards US contractors and companies to do this. And of course, the rearmament of Ukraine too, what they'll be looking at doing is steering towards, no, don't look at Rheinmetall, look at General Dynamics. Access to rare earths and critical minerals. The US will likely gain preferential access to Ukraine's vast deposits of rare earth elements, lithium, titanium, and other critical minerals essential for defense, technology, and energy sectors. Titanium is very, very critical for then the next wave of high-end weapon systems. This could reduce US reliance on China for these resources, ensuring long-term strategic and economic benefits. Take into account what my friend said about China. Private sector investment. With US firms getting access to mining projects in Ukraine, American companies will profit directly from extraction, refining, and exporting these minerals. This could help offset some of the financial burden of military aid given to Ukraine. Geopolitical leverage. Beyond just the financial returns, securing these resources strengthens US influence in Eastern Europe while reducing Russia's and China's economic foothold in the region. But I see that this also does reduce sovereignty as well, that 50% of this is going to go into helping out America and pay back as well. So this idea of it's going to become more sovereign after BlackRock and Vanguard and all these other bloody mining companies have stepped in and setting up this, and relying on their energy and their military as well. If we take out maybe principles and just look at sovereignty, you could say that it has reduced, that Europe is just becoming an extension arm of America, rather than having a healthy balance of sovereignty between maybe competing nations, but no one single nation can really put the brakes on you enough. For example, look at, say, a military that is completely reliant on American equipment, that America has full control of that. The example we give is India. India has a mix of equipment from different areas in the world. Some looking for US fighters, some Russian fighters, Russian anti-ship missiles and all of this. So no single player here, depending on how politics change, can just completely put the stoppers on it. Legends, that is all that I have for you today. Have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.